I was walking through the Honey Island swamp one night to look for my dog who had escaped my backyard and swam through the swamp one night before. I had walked a good mile before sitting down and taking a break, and that's where I saw it. I saw a 7.5 feet tall figure standing beside a tree, and the only thing I could see was the figure's yellow reptilian-like eyes staring at me. I quickly shone my flashlight onto it and got a good look at it. It had a thick coat of matted gray and brown hair and swamp weeds. I stared at it for a couple minutes. I then decided that it wasn't going to hurt me, so I stood up, and out of nowhere, the creature started charging me. I ran as fast as I could through the bushes and through the trees. I could hear it running behind me, and then when I got out of the swamp, the creature just stopped and ran back the way we ran. I came back the next morning to see if the creature from last night left any tracks. I arrived back at the swamp and quickly went back to where it stopped chasing me, and luckily, I found a set of footprints. I then got my casting equipment from my bag and made a cast of one of the footprints. But at the corner of my eye, I saw it. The creature was standing behind a few trees, and it was holding something. That something was my dog. After looking at it for a few moments, it left. I had sadly left my phone in the car, and after the casting finished drying, I quickly grabbed my phone from the car and took a photo. And from no one, I will never return from the swamp. I'm a 15-year-old guy, and I live in a remote part of Florida. Back when I was 13, I would always go hiking into the woods with my friends. To start this off, my name is Blake, and the other person who witnessed this alongside me is Liam. We used to go hiking together into the woods on weekends to wind down and relax, or just to have airsoft wars in the drier parts of the woods. So after a long day of fishing, we were unpacking our gear, and as the sun was beginning to set, that's when Liam noticed something strange with the tackle box we had brought along with us. "Hey Blake, come check this out." I came over, a little annoyed as I was still setting up the tent and it was a pain in the ass to pitch. "What is it?" I stopped as I now saw the long scratch marks that were engraved in the top and side part of the now mangled tackle box. "What the hell happened?" I asked, still examining the scratches, still trying to figure out what animal had tried to get into our box. "I don't know, but it was like this when we had come back to set up our tent." I was now a little on edge, thinking that there could now be a bear in the area. "Keep your knife close by when you go to sleep tonight," I said, clutching my pocket knife I had brought along. We then made the fire and started talking after a little while. The thoughts of earlier had drifted to the back of my mind until we both heard what sounded like footsteps of an animal coming from the underbrush. We both looked over at the source of the noise, thinking about what it could be. Those footsteps were too loud to be anything like a raccoon or a squirrel, so we had our knives out, just in case it was a predator stalking us. But what emerged from the underbrush still haunts me to this day. A tall, thin and pale-looking creature made itself known to us. It had claws that were bigger than any that I have ever seen. It didn't have any eyes, only dark pits of where the eyes should have been, but I knew it was staring at us. It then made this ear-piercing shriek and started charging at us. I then did the only logical thing I thought to do and threw the tackle box at it in a quick attempt to distract it. As soon as the box hit the creature, Liam and I made a dash towards the bathroom building that was in the camping area, and we locked ourselves in there. We didn't get an ounce of sleep that night, still hearing the wild pattering circle of the building and occasionally hearing the creature shrieking and clawing at the outside walls of the little building we were in. I was afraid that it was going to come through the door at any given second. We stopped hearing the shrieking and the wild pattering outside, but we still waited to go outside until the sun rose, just in case it would be waiting for us. When we did emerge from our temporary safe haven, we saw claw marks all over the door and the walls of the little building. We then made our way back to our camp slowly and hesitantly. When we had gotten back, everything was destroyed and thrown everywhere. We then turned around and gotten out of there as quickly as possible, not wanting whatever that thing was to return. When we had gotten back to my house, we decided it would be best to never speak of the events that night again. I think that what we had saw was the Rake, but I will never forget those dark pits staring into my soul. I was staying at my uncle and step aunt's house to babysit my 6-year-old twin cousins. The house was right beside a swamp in Canberra. I was about 14 to 15 years old at the time. I had just put my cousins to sleep when I heard a squelching noise in the swamp. I assumed it was a wild animal, a cow or sheep that had gotten lost. I ignored it, and the squelching continued for about 20 minutes before slowly stopping. After maybe half an hour, a low, distant croaking started. Assuming it was swamp toads, I wasn't scared, but for fear of my cousins waking up, I shone a light out there, and to my horror, there were no toads. A tall, yellowish-green humanoid figure stared into the woods, facing away from me. I nearly screamed, but managed to stuff it into a whimper. I don't know how, but the thing heard me. It turned around and it was near 8 feet tall, and pure black eyes reflected my torch beam. I threw back the curtains, hoping whatever it was hadn't seen me. The flashlight slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. I heard a banging, unlike someone trying to break the window, but like someone knocking on a door. My cousins had gotten out of bed and ran into the kitchen. They started screaming. I got a knife from the kitchen drawer and opened the window and stabbed it into the monster's hand. It shrieked and ran into the woods. I never babysat again. I have been to almost a fifth of the states in the U.S. for long stretches of time, and have always gotten something out of it. An interesting picture, weird occasion, odd personal stories, pretty much everything. When I went to Kentucky for a week-long vacation, I expected to maybe have a souvenir. Instead, I got something much more than I bargained for. One night, I was walking in a field somewhere in the eastern part of the state, I believe. I had just listened to a story of someone's podcast about this poison hornets, which are supposedly hornets that were exposed to chemicals in Ohio. Anyway, before I left, they were about to bring up a story from Kentucky, but I turned the radio off before they did. I decided to just walk around aimlessly and do nothing. As I did, I saw something tall and thin walk into a tree line. I followed it and soon saw that there was nothing there. No man, woman, child, or even a ghost or skinwalker, which I was half expecting. I decided to do something that may be illegal and set up a trail camera I brought with me, in case I saw a strange animal and wanted to capture it. I wound it around a sturdy tree and left it for the night, and then hunkered down in my rented car and slept. The next morning, I trudged out to the spot and saw something weird. The camera was lying on the ground, and the branches of the tree were lower than I remembered. I had a sense of unease, so I grabbed my camera and booked it out of the woods. While eating at a diner, I heard a man telling the waitress about a living tree. "I insist that the tree can move on its own," he said with clear conviction. Another person said that it was the man mantis of Kentucky, a creature that was a mantis as big as a man and very muscular, which allowed it to bend objects until they looked entirely different. I decided to research what he had said and found that he was one of the only few that reported that particular thing. Soon, I talked to a man who lived in Kentucky his whole life, and he told me what it really was: the Goat Man. There are many variations of this creature, so I'll tell you what I've heard. The man said there was a brilliant scientist who loved to experiment with goats, and one day he went insane and horribly messed something up and turned himself into a half-goat, half-human hybrid. And now, to this day, he'll cause people to go to dangerous sites, especially the railroad trestle where someone was killed by an oncoming train while walking on it for reasons unknown. I wasn't convinced, but decided to act like I was. Superstitious or not, I did everything I could to avoid it. The day I left, I decided to just take a leaf back as a souvenir. As I tore off a leaf, I heard a snarl behind me. I was scared and anxious at the same time. Without looking behind me, I placed the leaf on the ground and walked slowly away, and counted to 30 in my head. When I reached 30, I whipped out my phone, snapped a photo behind me, and broke into a full sprint. When I got to my car, I drove inside and locked the door. I checked my phone for what I had gotten a picture of and saw something horrific. It was about 7 feet tall, covered in dirty white fur on the top half. I don't know how to describe the bottom half. It had a very angry expression and horns. I thought, that's more of a satyr than a goat, man. Either way, I'm out. I slammed the gas pedal and made a K-turn to leave. As I did, I saw the same thing staring at me from the tree line. I was so terrified by that, along with stories about a living fountain statue and headless woman, that I haven't gotten back and probably never will go back to Kentucky. It was last spring. My boyfriend and I went to my cabin alone. It's in a small town in Minnesota, out in the middle of nowhere. The closest neighbor was about 4 or 5 miles away. Anyway, it was our second night there, and my boyfriend, let's call him T, was making dinner for us. I was trying to set up the DVD player so we could watch some movies. While I was doing that, T dropped the bowl and was frozen, staring out the window. He looked at me most scared look I have ever seen him, and he told me to come look outside. I looked outside and I froze also. There was this thing outside like 15 feet away from the cabin. The best I can describe what this thing looked like is a skinny, sick bear that had no fur on it, but I knew deep down it wasn't a bear. It stood up on its 2 legs and it was about 8 feet tall. It made this horrible scream that made me cover my ears, and then it quickly snapped its neck to look at T and I. That's when I backed up and grabbed my handgun just in case. For like 5 minutes it was staring at us and it freaking smiled at us, and there was so many teeth that looked really sharp. It screamed again and ran into the woods. T and I just looked at each other, shocked, and we quickly packed and we were leaving in the morning just because it had scared us so much. We went to bed around 11:30 that night and tried to sleep. We both had our handguns next to us, and while we were sleeping, we woke up to scratching on the cabin outside. It was currently about 4 in the morning. I screamed, "Get the hell away from us!" We heard this creepy, scary laugh, and it just went silent. We went to sleep again. In the morning with the sunlight, T and I went outside, and around the cabin was bloody claw marks and our car was scratched up. We quickly packed up and got the hell out of there. While we were driving down the driveway, I looked back and I saw the thing on the roof of the cabin smiling, and it waved. I have not been back there yet, and my uncle that owns the cabin has seen it too. There is now traps all over the place and now guns all over the cabin. I am never going back there again, even with more safety. Never. I live in a small town near Great Falls, Montana, and one night, about 2 years ago, late at night, me and my cousin were sitting in my room playing video games and joking around. We were home alone and didn't think much about it. I remember watching a video about skateboarding, and for some reason, my cousin paused the video. I looked at him confused. He was in complete shock, looking at the window next to my bed. Now keep note that my cousin always liked to mess around and scare people, but something seemed so off with the way he looked. He looked petrified. I didn't bother asking what was wrong, I just turned to the window. I couldn't see anything. I looked at him and said, "Come on, dude, I know you're messing around." And then he started almost crying. I was freaked out and didn't know why he was crying. He was trying to talk, but nothing was coming out of his mouth. And he was just frozen in fear, like he was in a trance. After a minute, he started to calm down and told me what he had saw. He said there was a gray figure looking at him through the window with bright blue eyes. I have never seen him so surreal, and I believed him. We sat in the living room for about 30 minutes when we decided to go back in my room. But as soon as we walked in, we heard a blood-curdling screech that came through the window. It sounded like someone took a fork and a knife and scraped the two together, but it was incredibly loud. Me and my cousin ran into the spare room across the house from my room, and we hid any near window near us and called my parents, who were not too far away. They rushed home and found me and my cousin sitting in a corner, paralyzed in fear. We told them what had happened, and even though we sounded crazy, they believed us. We ended up moving out of that house a month later, and that was the first time I had heard about this creature. The second time was even more terrifying. Only 3 months ago, my friends and I were celebrating a festival that our town hosts every year. There was roughly 6 of us, and we were driving around in a side-by-side on small roads that led around to the forest. These roads were not taken care of and were very bumpy, and we didn't want to get in the wreck, so we drove 5 miles below the speed limit. We were all listening to music, singing along, and we all see this really bright blue object shining at us in the tree lining. They looked like a pair of eyes. We stopped for a minute and tried to decide what it was, and then it started moving. The only thing we could see were the eyes of what seemed to be a 6 to 7 foot tall creature. We sped off in a hurry, but we all wanted to know what it was, so we went back to the tree lining. We all sat there, not saying a word, waiting for someone to make the next move. We all started talking about what it could be, and a kid, I'm not going to say his name, but he got out and started walking towards the tree line. He started calling us losers and sissies for not following him, so we all got out of the vehicle and started to follow him into the trees. We walked around the area exploring. We were there for about 10 minutes when we all hear the loudest scream that came from what seemed like 5 feet away. The scream was so loud, I could have sworn my ears were ringing. We all ran back to the side-by-side. When we started driving away, we all saw a huge, white, blue-eyed creature that looked human. I couldn't make out many other features because it was so dark. I tell this story all the time to people, and I don't care how crazy I sound, but I will never forget those 2 nights. This is my first story that I've ever really been comfortable sharing. I live in Idaho, and I'm not going to say where exactly, but it's decently populated. My name is Maddie, and I'm a 17-year-old female. This happened to me last winter. Me and some old friends usually would stay at my house and hang out over the long weekends, or during breaks we had just because of the weather. My room was pretty big and was in the basement, so we would always be down there because I had 4 younger siblings, so it got pretty noisy with all of them around. One night, me and a good friend were having a sleepover. It was about 1:30 to 2 a.m. We were listening to scary stories and doing everything we could to scare ourselves and get the old adrenaline pumping. We were bored high school kids. I mean, what else were we to do? Anyway, we decided to sneak out since it had stopped snowing and message a few friends to see who was awake. No one was, but I wasn't surprised. As we were walking around, my friend started to tell me about how about a week ago, from this incident, she was playing with some crystals and other satanic things. We had a friend who was pretty into that kind of stuff and witchcraft in general. They also had a Ouija board and were trying to communicate with someone. Or something. I immediately told her she shouldn't have done that. And I'm a pretty paranoid person. Even though I like to be scared, I always set boundaries, and I told her that a Ouija board is crossing it. She's Native American, so there's quite a bit she believes in and doesn't believe in. She's taught me about some things, like Skinwalkers and wendigos. Now those I believe in and absolutely terrify me. She's mentioned about how on the reservation there's always sightings and stories of those who have seen or dealt with them at first hand. A few weeks after her telling me this, I was laying on the couch in the upstairs, sometimes in the AM, sometime in the morning, probably close to 3 or 4, just watching some Netflix. I decided to head to bed after finishing a whole season of a show I'd been watching. As I was walking towards the stairs, I noticed a dark, misshapen figure standing near it. Note this window was a good 5 feet off the ground, and this thing was 4 more feet above it. I froze and stared, trying to see if it was just seeing things and to let my eyes adjust. But then I opened the gate at the top of the stairs and walked down slowly, still watching out the window. It turned, and even though I didn't see any specific features, but I felt its eyes staring directly at me. I then ran down the rest of the stairs and hid in my room. I had heard heavy footsteps outside walking around the back side of the house where my room was. It smelt horrible, like walking into a dump full of dead skunks and fish. I then remembered the story that my friend had told me about how if you talk about these creatures too often, you might start seeing things. I cried quietly, trying not to let it hear me. After passing out from holding still for so long, I woke up to my parents yelling outside. Something had killed all of our chickens, ducks, and turkeys, along with one of our cats. Our horse was out in the field hiding and obviously startled from something. Now, I don't talk about these things at all, and I never go outside alone when it's dark or in areas I know nothing about. Hello, my name is Sebastian, and I'm going to tell you the time that I was almost killed. This world still has yet to be fully explored, and I need people to hear about the time that a werewolf had almost taken my life, or so I thought. It started as a normal day, although it was the last day of school, so summer was right around the corner. My parents went out for town for a nice night out, and it was just me and my sister. I was 10 at the time, and my sister was 20. We decided to go out for ice cream. Me and my parents don't live far from town, but if we were going, we would have to go through a small but dense forest. My parents only had one car since my mom worked from home, so me and my sister had to walk. In the middle of the walk, maybe about 5 minutes in, me and my sister decided to play I Spy. So my sister gave me the honor of starting. It was at this time that I had just noticed the werewolf, but I didn't know what it was just yet. It was hiding behind the bushes, and I only saw its back and ears. Now, I'll have you know that me and my sister are fans of the supernatural. We are fans of werewolves and vampires and much more. But my sister dropped her mouth when she saw it. She whispered to me, "Run!" I didn't understand, but then before I knew it, I heard loud thuds getting louder. We only had 10 minutes left to walk, but it then only took 3 minutes since me and my sister were basically running, trampling over each other. But then this next part is the part I almost died. Get ready, the monster leaped on me, but I had no idea. Good thing is my sister did. She grabbed my arm and yanked me forward, and just as she did that, I jumped, so I flew forward even more, and just as I landed, I felt a little something shaped touch my back. But it didn't pierce my skin. Then before we knew, me and my sister were in town, and then the beast just stopped dead in its tracks. Me and my sister looked, and I got a clear view. I almost passed out when I saw what it was. It was like a huge wolf, but with a man's body. And at this time, one word had come to my mind. Werewolf. Me and my sister ran to the ice cream shop, which was still open. And then, there, we had ice cream, and my sister had called our parents to come pick us up. Then, 12 or so minutes later, our parents came, and that was the last me and my sister ever saw of that werewolf. And I have to say I'm glad about that. I still have nightmares about that thing to this day. It still haunts me. I'm 14 now and going to be 15 soon, and I still can't get any sleep to this day knowing that werewolf is still in those woods waiting to claim me as its dinner one day. Some may not believe my story, and I understand that, but at least hear me out before you close your mind. I will not say my name, where I live, or my friend's name for privacy, and that I will say where we lived was a well-populated area with streetlights shining on the streets, aka suburbia. This takes place in New Zealand at my friend's house, where I was for a sleepover. We don't really keep in touch anymore, as we're going our separate ways and go to different high schools. Let's just say the supernatural just loves me so much when weird stuff happens. I'm just used to it, but always got a good story up my sleeve. I was young. Not too young to imagine this as well as my friend who can back up this experience that occurred. So, my friend and I were both around 11 or 12 at this time this was taking place. We were both really good friends and loved to hang out with each other. In the end, both of us agreed to go to her house for a sleepover. Her house was a one-story house where the lounge, dining table, and kitchen are basically all in one room, while the rooms were another section of the house. So I grabbed my stuff after school on Friday, I assume, and we went to her house for the sleepover. This was probably in the late spring of November or early summer of December, as I live in the southern hemisphere, so don't get confused. So, before the sunset, my friend and I went for a lovely walk to the beach that wasn't far, near our school. As we were going through a brush walkway, I got that feeling that something was off, and the feeling of being watched. I definitely told my friend. Obviously, she said it's just my imagination, or I'm just acting up, or something like that. The sun was setting and her family and I had dinner as we were back at her house. I remember it was a little awkward at first, but then warmed up as we were all having a good time. It was around the time where the sky was all sorts of colors, red, orange, pink, pale blue, yellow, and that's when I started to get this weird offset feeling. Brushing the feeling off, I had a great time with my friend, running around, talking, and going for that nice walk before the sunset. And that's where I come to the point of the sunset part, where I get that offset feeling. We started to get blankets to build a fort out in the lounge where we'd sleep for the night. The sun completely set now, and it was around 9 o'clock. The rest of my friend's family was now in bed as they have a younger daughter sleeps with her parents. We both made the fort and quite pleased with it. Even though our feet stuck out the end, we were satisfied. I don't remember much of what happened for the next or past 5 hours, but I think her parents had to tell us to shut up a couple of times. I was a night owl, so I quite hyped, and that kept my friend up, and she was all hyped up as well. Then things went south. It was when we were just standing and talking about the fort we built when something caught my eye. A large, big, muscular figure stood dominantly in the window. My friend doesn't have any blinds, and so we could see outside, but not so well since the street lamp was a bit far from her house as she lived in a cul-de-sac. The only thing that helped us to see the other houses in the road was a full moon, a bit above the houses with its illuminating light shining vaguely through the window. Both of us, with young, curious minds, went closer to this creature, looking right up at it. I will describe this creature to the best of my abilities. It was around 7 feet tall, nearly reaching the top of the window frame, just inches below it. Its body was very muscular, had a snout of a wolf, pointed up ears, and the body of a very muscular, buff man, but had fur covering it. You could see the bristles of the fur as the moon shone onto it. The eyes were something I can never forget. They glowed a red-like color. You know, the ones you'd see the alphas have in Teen Wolf. But the light from the moon reflected off the glass going onto its eyes, making them shine white. It looked like it was snarling or just showing its teeth, which shone a really white sparkle and were pointed like dog's teeth that a husky has. The moon shone brightly and beautifully, but it didn't do so great as we both couldn't see the creature perfectly. I personally think it may have been a werewolf, but later on, I just don't know anymore. Both of us didn't dare to turn on the lights at first, but just observe it. I then remember running to the kitchen to look at the time. I couldn't see it, so I turned on the light, which wasn't so bright but shone a warm orange. I specifically remember the time being around 22 minutes after 1 in the morning. My friend came running next to me. We weren't scared, but actually intrigued, almost excited that this is happening. Both of us ran back, and me being the leader and my friend following close behind. We tried turning on the lounge light, but it just made looking out to the neighborhood worse, so we turned it off. The light made it impossible to see things as the glass just reflected the light. My friend turned it off and I got closer to it, trying to understand what this thing is. This is the part which scares me the most just thinking about it now. I remember the kitchen warm colored light shine dimly onto this creature, giving it enough light to see me clearly. I watched, as well as my friend, to see it turn its head to me, look at me straight in the eye with its red eyes, but mainly shone a white from the moonlight and kitchen light. It almost looked as if this creature was grinning at me mischievously or even smiling. My friend freaked out and I felt scared, and that this isn't like me. I simply don't get scared until something bad is happening or something evil is getting at me. So to put it in an easier way, I'm a bad bitch, so when I felt scared, I knew I shouldn't mess with whatever this thing is. I with my friend away from the window and closer to the couch or the TV. We both agreed that it was really late, so we should just go to sleep. And so we went to our fort and climbed in. Our feet obviously stuck out as our fort only covered the top half of our bodies. Later that night, I woke up to see this thing. I will describe this also to the best of my abilities, as I can't really explain so well what I saw. I was facing my friend as her back was facing me. I woke up to see this creature looking forward towards the kitchen area, most preferably the other part of the house. It looked like Remus Lupin in his werewolf form, but smaller and closer to the ground. Its face looked deformed, its skin was overlapping other skin coming into the middle or something, as it seemed like it was debating on what head of a creature it should turn into. Then it snapped its head to me instantly and froze, like a child getting caught. My head fell back onto the pillow. Well, that's what I think, as I just somehow blacked out midway in falling. I honestly don't understand how. Then, in the morning, my friend and I both talked about how this under our breaths, trying to keep quiet. Once light from the sun poured into the lounge, we got a better look at the window. There was no complete evidence of something being 7 foot tall stopping the light of the moon coming into the room. The only thing in the front of their window was a 3-foot hedge cut into a square shape. I never talk about that night, and nor does my friend, and we couldn't explain what on earth that was and didn't want to sound insane. I didn't even tell my grandmother, and she knows a lot about these things. It just never really caught my mind. Questions now and then run past my mind on what the hell that creature was. I still wonder if it was either a werewolf or a skinwalker or a shapeshifter. Were there more than one? How did it even get into the house, and was there no forced entry? What did it do? What did it want? Was it those same red glowing eyes I've seen before? Did it bite me? Did it touch me? Watch me? I honestly don't know. I'm still baffled and shocked with that night and never spoke about it. But that was only one of the weirdest nights I've ever experienced. And I've experienced much, much crazier things that range from my UFO sighting with my best friend to fairies taking my fairy bread. I'm hoping and praying for protection. As I said, I have many questions on and why, but no one knows, and hopefully I'll get answers to come. It was a rainy Friday night. My friend Sarah was over to stay the night in our tent that was placed in the backyard by the woods. Once we had got all of our stuff in, we started to eat since it was coming up 10 p.m. It was around 12 a.m. when we heard snarling. I froze, and I had that very uneasy feeling that this is something that I thought was a werewolf. "I hope it's not what I think it is," said Sarah. I slowly nodded. I was about to continue, but that's when we heard the scariest, biggest ear-piercing howl, which made me jump out of my sleeping bag. Sarah was now full out crying, and I kept telling her that this werewolf won't hurt us. It was maybe an hour later, and the tent kept on being pushed around and scratched against. I decided to have a look, but I couldn't believe what I saw. Not one werewolf, but two. They both snapped their heads around towards me, having their sickening amber eyes burning holes through my head. It was morning. I didn't remember what happened last night after they looked at me. Me and my Sarah decided to have a look around, and we saw scratch marks and 5 mangled birds. I put my hand over my mouth. Me and Sarah ran to the door. We didn't bother telling my parents because they wouldn't believe me, but this only happened last night, and I'm still very petrified. I live in the countryside, a good 2 hours away from most big cities. Even for a small town, we are pretty far out and don't have a lot going on for us. We can speak of luck that we've got a big grocery store at all. My cat was pretty much a feral barn cat on a farm not more than 15 minutes away from my flat. As I said, a very small countryside town, pretty much surrounded by barnyards. It was a disgustingly hot day, and I was drenched in sweat, and the blinding sun was beginning to annoy the crap out of me. But still, my excitement was not dying down at any time. Hell, I was 16 years old, and this was my first ever cat. Now you can picture how much more excited I was when we arrived at our first barn that actually had cats. No, not just cats, but kittens. Not older than a few months. I immediately saw them too, but nothing that I saw piqued my interest quite as much as a tiny black cat. Frail and sickly looking, sitting off to the far left. More dirty than all the other cats I saw strolling about and much smaller. My poor Liv, she was the same age as all the other cats, but of how sick she was, they all looked double her size. I was told I shouldn't take her because of that, because she would probably die anyway. But I was smitten. Besides, I would never leave behind a sick kitten if I have the chance to rescue one, much less for selfish reasons. After some pleas and a brief moment of giving my mother my most convincingly puppy dog eyes, it was decided. I was allowed to take my baby home with me. Naturally, with a bit of help of the landowner's employees, I went to catch her, or well, participate in catching her. I say this because immediately as soon as I walked closer, as close as I could without scaring her off anyway, I was caught off guard when I first saw the adult cat around. The first thing I immediately thought was how oddly focused the cat was on Liv, not even looking my way once. And then there was the fact that, while all cats had some form of physical response to me, be it running away or towards me, this one did not. Almost as if it were not there at all. And it was by far not the only weird thing about this animal. Now, I practically grew up around animals, knowing them like the back of my hand, especially cats, and I did not like what I saw. From the disproportionate body to the fully revealed, way too large and crooked claws on its front paws, everything about this cat screamed of red flags. Its fur looked nothing like I had ever seen on a cat. A short hair cat, anyway. It looked so dry, almost like straw. My animal-loving self has never not wanted to touch an animal up until that very moment. As the cat continued to fixate Liv and completely ignored me, I had already spent enough time on observing it for me to miss the moment that Liv was caught. And I noticed this because Liv let out a hiss so ferocious and a scream so loud that the odd cat jumped off of the fence it had been perched on. So unlike a cat. There was no graceful leap, no moment at all like a cat jumping off of a high place. Imagine picking up a cat and dropping it to your feet. How it would land on all fours with an awkward thud, because that's pretty much what this looked like. Don't get me started on the way it trudged after the person carrying off Liv. I almost felt like an asshole for judging the damn thing, especially when I finally stopped doing so for a moment and took note of the absolute absence of a tail. It was as if there had never been anything there. No stub tail, hell, there wasn't even a visible tailbone. Not a single odd hair that could have indicated a tail had ever been there. I wanted to feel bad, desperately so, but the way it was at a perfect balance, it did not seem to have any troubles in spite of everything. It just seemed so unreal for the moment. My mother called me over when they finally managed to put Liv into the transport box that we had brought, but I was so fascinated with this hideous cat that I slow walked over alongside it. Its attention was still entirely on Liv. Even as she was long out of sight, sitting barely a meter away from the box, the odd cat meowed. No facial changes as it did. No twitch of its terribly bent whiskers, no movement whatsoever. Just the noise that sounded more like a human being pronouncing the word meow than a cat actually meowing. I crouched down to it in an attempt to get it to meow again for me, making various kitty-attracting noises. But the one time it finally looked at me, it did so with that what can only be described as a full-on scowl. This was the first time I saw its face move, and the last time I ever wanted to see it, but unfortunately it did not stop there. The cat bared its teeth at me. I'm not messing around, it was like a dog. And the teeth, I have never seen a cat with such thick dog-like teeth, from the placement in its jaws all the way up to the shape of each individual tooth. They were stained yellow. I vividly remember thinking, is there even one fucking thing that isn't effed up about this cat? And what could have caused it to look and behave like this? Looking back at it, I should probably feel bad for doing what I did, but I don't. Because I took a nearby bucket and tossed it towards the cat just enough to scare it off, intentionally not attempting to hit it. The employee that caught Liv glanced over and she heard the noise, and entirely to my surprise, she pulled a disgusted face instead of scolding me like I thought she would as the cat trotted away just as it came. All of us must have heard the noise of bones cracking as it walked, its legs visibly bending in ways they shouldn't every couple steps. I recall my mother looking embarrassed on my behalf. "Watch what you're doing and you could have hit the poor thing," she said. The lady just shook her head, looking absolutely not fazed by what I did. "It's not one of ours. For all I care, kick it in the gut if it gets too close. It's aggressive, even unprovoked." As she spoke, she took off one of her working gloves to show us a set of barely healed over and properly stitched wounds. Needless to say, I did not go anywhere near that thing again looking back. It scared me how close it had been to Liv. The worst thing about this encounter, though, happened when we were at the gates and I looked back, instinctively glancing towards where I'd previously seen Liv and the odd one. I saw something, almost shadow-like, crawl towards a spot in the sun. For a short moment, it was oddly elongated, and when I say oddly, I mean it did not look like a cat stretching at all. Before long, there was a cat sitting in the sun. It was way too small to have been whatever the hell that shadow was, but one thought will never leave me. It looked like one copy of Liv, down to how sickly it even was. But where she had a long, thin tail that flickered erratically as if it had been broken before, this thing had nothing.